and welcome to Home Sweet Home with Katie Cobb. I'm so excited today. We have a great topic we're going to be talking about, estate planning. And I have a bunch of questions we're going to be asking Melissa Carvajal. She is a estate planning lawyer. She also focuses in elder law. And what was the other topic again? Probate. The elder law and the estate planning was what really got me excited because I have so many questions in that area. And I know a lot of my friends, now that we're in our 30s and our parents are going into that phase, we're realizing that they should have done things differently and that we should do things differently for our kids. So I am so excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm excited to be here.
And help prepare our viewers for their families. So let's get started. My first question is, what is the biggest myth in estate planning?
So I would say there's probably 3 big myths in estate planning. The first one I would say is that people think they just need a will and that's it. And they think that a will do everything that they need for their estate planning purposes. Where a will, they don't understand, means that their family is going to have to go through court. They're going to have to wait about a year for their family to be able to get their assets that are going through the will. They're going to have to pay lawyers' fees and court fees. I would say another large estate planning myth is that people think that you have to be rich to do estate planning. They think of, needing like a vast estate, or they think of like trust fund babies. Yeah. A lot of people will say like, I'm not rich enough to have an estate plan, or I'm not old enough to have an estate plan. And I would say that's the third myth, is that people think estate planning is for the elderly or people that have retired, when really the most important time to plan is when you're young, when you're a homeowner, or when you have young children.
All right. Now, you mentioned will, and that people think that that's enough. Can you define what a will is?
Sure. So a will basically is a document where you are electing somebody to handle your affairs. That person is either called an executor or a personal representative, and you're saying where you want your stuff to go. But a common misperception is people think the will controls everything. But a will doesn't have anything to do with your life insurance or your investment accounts or your retirement accounts. Mm-hmm. All those things can have beneficiaries on them. So a lot of times someone will say, oh, well, my husband is leaving everything to me in the will. But they don't realize that if they have a beneficiary designated, that is where the asset is actually going to go. So it's part of a more comprehensive plan. Everybody should have a will, but it's really not the only thing that you need. And a lot of people think if they have a will, mistakenly, they're avoiding court. But when you have just a will, your family is actually 100% going to court to get the assets that are passing through the will. So simplified, the will is a document that's going to allow you to pick somebody to wrap up your affairs and to give your stuff where you want it to go.
Okay. My sister was the administrator, and I just remember her yelling at us a lot because she had to do all the work.
Right.
We were just like, thank God we were born later. Right. We were not the first.
Sometimes the oldest.
It's tough, and it was. I remember, even trying to get some of the money for the funeral costs.
Right.
It was hard, and thank God I knew my father was a veteran, so we were able to bury him out in Riverhead.
Okay.
But it was tough trying to figure it all out. And then you're right, when we had to put the house on the market and the time that it took, it's a nightmare. How long does the process take?
So estate planning, this is a question that I get because a lot of people don't do estate planning because 1, they don't know how much it's going to cost, and 2, they don't know how long it's going to take. So in general, estate planning will take about 6 to 8 weeks from the time that you hire your attorney to the time that you actually have your plan in place. Now that doesn't mean that you put it in a cabinet or a safe and you walk away and you never speak to your attorney again. That's not the way that I operate my business. I make sure I have a lifetime relationship with my clients, that I know their family members, but the actual drafting of the plan and designing the plan, and from the time you hire me to the time you actually have your plan in your hands, is about 6 to 8 weeks. Now, normally, that's the course. But if you have, you're having a baby or you're having surgery or you're going out of the country and you feel that you want your plan expedited because you want to make sure all your ducks in a row for those reasons, then obviously we can expedite it. But I would say the whole process takes between 6 and 8 weeks.
With LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer out there, why shouldn't I do my own plan?
So a lot of people will call up and they'll say, the first question out of their mouth is, how much does a simple will cost? And it's very hard, to give the non-lawyerly answer and go, it depends, because a good lawyer is not just a document drafting service. Yeah. And so there are these document drafting services where you can, print out a healthcare proxy or print out a power of attorney for nothing or for a very small cost, a couple of $100s. But the problem is that you don't know if that's going to be executed properly under New York state law, if it's going to have the actual clauses that you need in those documents, if it's actually going to comply with New York state law. And the other thing is, even if you do, go to one of these places and you get something that, okay, I understand I'm going to have to sign this in front of 2 witnesses, or this says that it's going to comply with New York state law, you don't have any type of relationship with your attorney. Your attorney isn't in any way your trusted advisor. You're not able to call up somebody and say, oh, my spouse just died, or I just had another grandchild, or I just bought another piece of property. You don't have a relational lawyer. You just have this set of documents that you have no idea if they're going to work. So sometimes I say to people, you can have a really cheap plan, but that plan probably is not going to work at the time your loved ones need it. And you're never going to have somebody that is really your advisor, or I feel like your life coach, where they're going to speak to your children and they'll be able to explain to your children where your assets are, who your financial planner is, who your accountant is, who your broker is, who all these people are that are in your life. That if you have a relationship with an attorney, they would know all those things, and they'd be able to guide your children or your loved ones through, a traumatic or dramatic time in their life where they're trying to get your affairs in order because you're either incapacitated or you've died.
We had somebody on this channel before who we do mortgages, and we always say like Rocket Mortgage is like basically creating a car crash, because nothing's verified, nothing's like you're using a computer algorithm. So you can't trust your most valuable assets with a computer algorithm.
Right, you're not getting the professional advice, and you're also not getting the relationship, and then there's nobody for your family to turn to. And when something goes wrong, there's nobody to blame or even ask a question to.
Yep. So I think that's a really important one. If I'm not rich, do I need a trust?
So again, a lot of people think of a trust fund, they think of a trust fund baby, someone that never has to work, someone that is just, getting money in their bank account every week or every month from like a very wealthy grandfather, parent, and that is not the case at all. Just to explain to you the difference between a will and a trust. So a will is going to elect somebody to be in charge of wrapping your affairs up and also passing on your stuff to where you want it to go. When you do that with a trust, it does basically the same thing. Instead of calling that person an executor, you're calling them a trustee, and you are electing someone that's going to be in charge of wrapping up your affairs, and also you're putting where you want certain things to go. With a trust, however, it's a private proceeding, which a lot of people like. When you have a will, you have to have that will reviewed and approved by a judge through what's called a probate process. So your family members, they have your will, they're going to hire an attorney, they're going to pay a court fee, and then they're going to sit and wait for about a year in order for a judge to review the will and then to approve the will, to say, okay, you've elected Sally as your executor. Sally's now going to be able to sell your home or go into your bank accounts or go into your other accounts that don't have beneficiaries and divvy them up the way you've selected in your will. But that's a very public thing. Your petition and your will is actually online in the court system, so your nosy neighbors can see what you have. If you've disinherited someone, or you have, a child that you're not leaving, anything to, or a grandchild that you're leaving more to one than the other, it's all going to be public. With a trust administration, you're going to get the same exact results, only you're going to be able to do it efficiently. You're not going to have to pay a court fee. You're not going to have to pay a lawyer fee, and you're going to be able to do it almost immediately. So for example, with a house, and this is a big problem in Long Island, is that somebody does a will and they are going to pass their home on, let's say, equally to their 2 children. And they've elected the 2 children to be co-executors. The children come in, they hire me, we go through court, and it takes about a year for a judge to say, okay, this is a valid will, your parents have selected you, and you're going to be able to sell this home. But during that year, the kids are responsible for paying all the upkeep and all the taxes on their parents' home. And especially in Long Island, it's very hard to pay the taxes on your own home and then have to pay the taxes on somebody else's home. Yeah. And a year is around the time. I have some clients that are waiting 18 months, so they've paid the taxes, now they're on their 3rd time of paying astronomical taxes. But you're also paying the upkeep of the house, making sure there's no squatters that are in there, making sure that the electric is on, right? The pipes don't freeze, the landscaping is maintained. It becomes a huge burden, and even if it's not just a monetary burden, it's a time burden. So if you have young kids and now you're responsible for someone else's home, and maybe the home is 45 minutes away from you, going there and making sure that the upkeep, and again, even the time and expense it takes for that. With a trust, it's almost immediate. As soon as you want to administer the trust, you're able to. You can, in my example, those two kids could have re-signed a deed and just given the house to themselves and sold it the next day, hired a broker, hired a real estate attorney, and so, sold it, and not had to go through, the trouble of finding money to pay taxes and dealing with all of that.
Yeah. Because I know, like, I have some clients that call me and they're like, yeah, we're stuck in probate court. And I'm like, oh, and they're like, it's going to take up to 3 years. And I'm like, 3 years?
Right. A year usually is when there's no problems, right? Nobody is fighting. Everybody gets along. Everybody agrees with what the person has written down in their own will.
Yeah.
It's about a year. And that's a long time to wait for, especially if you're responsible for something until that time.
Yeah. Which not every family agrees on what the best things are sometimes.
Right,
even
and you
those
end up
loving
having
families.
right. You end up having one child that's more responsible and who does everything, and then the will splits everything equally. But one child is cleaning out the house and hiring a broker to get an appraiser and hiring a real estate attorney, going through the walkthroughs, going through. You have to be there and open up the house every time a potential buyer comes in. And the other kids, one of them's in California and the other one doesn't do anything. And then when the house is sold, everybody gets an equal check.
Yeah.
So it causes a lot of family strife to just go through a will. There's a lot of conflict.
So, like, one of the things that I want to mention as we're talking about that, because it's really important, is, like, I know as a kid, I remember, like, when my grandparents died, a family war started. And my father never spoke to his brothers and sisters again. And our family was really divided because nobody could agree on what to do with the property.
Right.
And that's just, you don't want that. So I know you were saying, like, your job is to keep
Right,
families together.
Right. I always say my job is to make sure that your family stays out of court and out of conflict. Because a lot of times what will happen, and we've been talking about, passing on properties or passing on a home with a will or a trust, but your estate plan is really more comprehensive than that, because a will is never going to talk about what happens if you become incapacitated or if you become disabled. And most people are going to become incapacitated in some way or another before they die, whether it be physically or mentally. And a lot of times, people say, oh, I just need a will. And I go, okay, but what happens if you get into a car accident right now? Who's going to step forward to make your medical decisions? And a lot of times people will say, well, I didn't think about that, but I'm just assuming it would be my spouse. But maybe you don't want your spouse making medical decisions for you. And a lot of times what happens is people have their children and they've never discussed maybe their end-of-life wishes with them or what they would want done in the event if they had a terminal condition. And now you have two children that are standing in a hospital fighting over what they believe their parents' wishes would be. And like you're saying, in your family, sometimes those relationships never get repaired because you have the person that is going to ultimately make a decision, and maybe the person never agrees with that, and maybe somebody has to carry around a lot of guilt for making the decision because they didn't know what their parent wanted, or they don't agree with their siblings. And I've seen time and time again siblings that their relationship is strained, or as I said, it just never ever is repaired because of those medical decisions when somebody, a parent, a loved one is incapacitated and they didn't know what the person wanted. And when it comes to money or property and being disposed of, the ugliness of families come out. And so I always say to my clients, like, if this is difficult for you to do, imagine what it's going to be like. The personalities of your kids, the personalities, and where it becomes really important is if you have a blended family. A lot of people now are on second marriages or they have kids from a different union, and that's really where it becomes extremely contentious because people don't do planning, or they do poor planning, or they did planning 20 years ago and never updated it.
Yeah. So you said the will, the trust, now you said estate planning. So can you tell me exactly everything that's included when you do estate planning?
Sure. So an estate plan is different, obviously, for each client.
Right.
But it's a comprehensive plan that is going to deal with what happens to you if you become incapacitated, if you become disabled, or when you die. And the way that, at least I do it, is that when I meet with a client for the first time, I get to know them by asking them questions about their family dynamics, what they own, how they own it. As you know, when you take title to a house, there's a lot of people out there that, people are getting married later in life. So people have their own assets. They have their own homes. One person moves into the other person's house. They get married. They just assume, oh, that house is half mine. And that's not the case at all. You're never on the deed. And some people don't even realize that until, unfortunately, the spouse that has their name on the deed dies.
Yeah.
So estate planning, besides dealing with your incapacity and your disability, is also seeing how things are titled. And then what I do is I kind of give them an education on New York State law as to how each asset of theirs, whether it be a bank account, life insurance policy, an investment account, a piece of property, whether it be your primary residence or an investment property, how New York State would say all of that is going to be divided if you were to die. But again, with your estate plan, you also need to figure out something that would happen if you were incapacitated, even temporarily. A lot of people don't do estate planning until they're older, but what happens if you're, 30 something years old, you get into a car accident and your kids are at school? Who's picking up your kids from school? It's not going to, the police or the school is not going to let like some random person just come in and pick up your kids. So part of the plan that, we do at my law firm is we do temporary guardians, and as well as long-term guardians if you have minor children. So you really have to take care of all your assets, but more importantly, you have to take care of your minor kids. And your estate plan will also go through, how you would want your kids to receive money. Not everybody wants their kids to receive a lump sum of money at 18 years old. In fact, I would counsel most people never to do that. You don't want to mess up their financial aid for college. You don't want to give an immature 18-year-old a lump sum of money, even if it's 10 grand. They're not going to make a financially mature decision. Yeah. So your plan really is comprehensive in dealing with your disability, your incapacity, and your death, but also dealing with your minor kids and who's going to take care of them temporarily, what type of legacy you want to leave behind. A lot of people don't think about even speaking to the people they're electing to be their guardians of their kids, because it's such a tough topic.
It's very, very tough. Now, I want to ask you another question.
Sure.
So can't you also leave your money like in a trust for your kids in a way that it's dispensed, like maybe over their childhood to pay for certain things and then even into their adulthood to pay for things?
Yes, absolutely. And that's one thing that we always do. And people will always say to me, that's like the feedback I always get. It's like, oh, I didn't even think about this. Like I didn't think, as I said, you don't want your child receiving a lump sum at 18. So what you can do with the trust when you have minor kids is that you can actually list that trust as a beneficiary. It's a terrible idea to list your minor kids on like a life insurance policy, an investment account, a bank account, because they can't own anything until they're 18. And then what would happen is if, God forbid, you did die before they turned 18, the court would be involved. They'd select a guardian, which you'd have no control over. The guardian would then handle their money until they turned 18, and then at 18, they'd get a lump sum. When you have an estate plan, what you can do with your minor kids is you can say, well, I want my kids to receive at certain ages or certain stages. So you can pick a trustee that's going to be able to give them a distribution or money for college or for, a wedding or a down payment on a house or grad school. Or you can say, knowing how much money you have, I'd like my kids to receive, half of it at 25 or half of it at 30. So you're able to still instill the values you want in them without them just receiving money at 18 and not having any idea what to do with it, and there's no checks and balances.
Okay. With my life insurance policy, you just mentioned that. So
Yes.
now we need to ask, like, what beneficiary are you putting? Because I'm a single mom.
Okay, so this is a perfect question. I get this all the time. Single parents oftentimes will say to me, well, I have a kid and my kid is going to be the beneficiary because I want everything to go to them. And it's a terrible idea because your child is a minor.
Yeah.
So if you practically see what happens, if something happens to you right now and your child is under 18 years old, the court will appoint a guardian to manage that money. Now, when I say manage that money, I don't mean somebody is going to be a financial advisor and invest that money and make it grow. It's going to sit in a bank account, earning no money, no interest.
Okay.
And then at 18 years old, your child is going to get a check for that lump sum. So if you have $1 million life insurance policy, your child is getting $1 million check when they turn 18. So the best time to plan is when you have minor children, which is like the complete opposite of how everybody views estate planning. They think, oh, I'm retiring or I'm 70 or 80 years old, so I should kind of start thinking about my own mortality and do an estate plan. But really, when you have minor kids, which is the reason I actually got into this field, was because that's the worst possible outcome is when you have a minor kid and obviously the parent dies before the child turns 18 and now there's a mess. There's fighting over who's even going to take care of the child. Maybe you're lucky and you have a lot of people step up, but maybe those are people you would never ever want, raising your kids. They don't have the same values as you. But with to go back to your question, with a trust, you can list your trust as the beneficiary on all of your bank accounts, your life insurance, your investment accounts, and then you would be the one stating, this is when I want my child or children to receive the money from those without no court involvement.
Well, I'm really glad we had this conversation because I have a lot of work to do. I'll be visiting with you shortly. We have a lot more questions on my list, but we are running, we're just talking a lot. So we're gonna definitely have to have you back because you have a lot of information. But for all you parents out there, I'm in my 30s and this has been a really big topic, like I mentioned at the beginning, both thinking about my parents and the fact that they're going into their elder years and the fact that I have a child. So Like I said, we're going to bring Melissa back because she is just so resourceful. But if you're having questions, you can actually reach out to Melissa. Her information is going to be in the description, and you and your family can schedule your consultation to start doing your estate planning. Thank you so much for tuning in to Home Sweet Home with Katie Cobb. I hope that you enjoyed this. And if you found this information valuable like I did, please share it with all of your friends and family because this is really good information that you need to be thinking about. And like and comment below. I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a wonderful day.